Okay, this is in Columbus, Ohio, on the 28th of August, 1997. And this is Victoria Ekegren interviewing, and I'm here with Eddie Waszak from the 17th. And tell me, sir, where were you born?
I was born in East Chicago, Indiana.
In what year?
In 1924.
Tell me about your dad.
Well, my dad was, I would say, a pretty clever guy. He was in the contracting business before the Depression. He was pretty much self-educated in those times. If you went through grade school, you probably reached your peak. But he spent some time at sea as a very young boy, and he seemed to learn a lot of mathematics and geometry and trig, and also a lot of handicrafts, machinist work and things like that. And he always would spend a lot of time with us making toys, and growing up during the Depression, there wasn't a lot of money to buy stuff like kids do nowadays. But my father always managed to make things and keep us interested in, in fishing and gardening and all sorts of things. I've gardened since I was maybe 7, 8 years old. And part of it was out of necessity during the Depression. Gardening helped put fresh food on the table.
How about your mother?
Well, she was, I would say, pretty much typical mother of those days. Housewife, homemaker, although she did work occasionally outside the home to help with the income. She probably suffered more during World War II than I did. From worry, and she always tended to think the worst, what's going to happen. And I know she mentioned to me while I was in a prison camp, initially I was missing in action for a couple of months, and then because of the lack in timely communication, she'd see the pictures in the newspapers, like Chicago Tribune, all the bodies of the Holocaust victims, and obviously she kept looking to see whether she could see me in those pictures. But in the end, it all came out well.
So how do you think World War I affected your parents in your childhood?
World War I?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my father was in the war, World War I. Although he did not serve overseas, he served 2 hitches, both in the States, and he was, I would say, pretty much pro-Army. The Army's good for you, make a man out of you, and this kind of thing. Just like probably the way you look at World War II as being something ancient. I was born in 24, which was only 6 years after the war ended, but as I grew up, say in grade school, it seemed to me that World War I was a long time ago. But I think it generally had not much of an effect on American people, because it was something that was over there, Mm-hmm. And after it was all over, the boys came home, and it was pretty much the end. But in my thinking now, I think World War I and World War II were pretty much one war. In fact, books I collect are only World War I and World War II in Europe, because they're so intermeshed with politics. That's about all I
about when the Depression hit? I know you mentioned the gardens. What are some other ways that the Depression affected your family? And
Oh, well, my father was in the contracting business, and just before the Depression, there was a tremendous boom in construction, and he was doing very well as a child of, say, 3 or 4 or 5. I didn't want for much, but unfortunately it was a very insecure business, because when the Depression came, everything stopped like overnight. Half-built buildings, homes, cities, and a lot of my father's work was done on credit, you know, and these companies went bankrupt. They didn't pay my father. My father couldn't pay his help, and there were, I'd say, 2 or 3 years where we had a very lean life. I would compare somebody on welfare today as being wealthy, because I remember we lived, and I don't know, it's hard to remember the time span, but I would guess, say, 2 years we had no electricity. All the heat was wood fire, you know, wood-fired heat, or some coal. Very little. There was no welfare. I mean, they had some welfare, but it was very meager, mostly surplus foods that the government had, and they would pass it out. And my father worked wherever he could, here and there, but there was just no steady work until, I would guess, until FDR got in and with the New Deal and WPA and started the economy rolling, and then things picked up real well. But the Depression was, I would say, on maybe 20, 30, 40% of the people, was very difficult, very difficult.
do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had 4 sisters and 1 brother.
And where were you in the scale?
I was the second one. I had an older sister, and then my brother was after me, and then the rest of the girls were after him. He was about 5 years younger than I was, and he served in Korea. Like I say, my father was World War I. I was in World War II. My brother was in Korea. Seems like every generation has some chance for military service.
So tell me about your schooling. How about high school and?
Well, I went to high school. The way I lived in Hammond, Indiana at the time, and the way they were set up, I went to junior high school, and junior high school was the 9th and 10th grade. I went to parochial school for 8 years, and then to junior high school for 2 years, where the subjects were just pretty much general. I don't think we had as many choices as children have now in that period of time. And then when I went to senior high school, or the high school in town, a fairly large school, and they had college prep courses, and they had business courses, and at that time I had no thought of going to college. But in junior high school, I took biology, and I became stuck on chemistry. And so over the next couple of years, I would go to the library and get all the old boys' books of chemistry, and I set a laboratory or wherever I could beg, borrow, or steal pieces of lab equipment. I began to study chemistry on my own. And then when I went to senior high school, I could take chemistry when I was a senior. Well, for some reason I took algebra also in my earlier year. And when I took chemistry in high school, I had a straight A all. In fact, I don't think I ever made a mistake on anything. And but in business, the course I was taking, business administration or no business practices, it was filing and typing, and before calculators they had comptometers and all sorts of mechanical calculating machines. And I did very poorly, extremely poor. Typing, I don't think I ever got over 20 words a minute. But I did well in chemistry, and then 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I was inducted in the service. And I went to basic training at Camp Callan, California, which was, I don't know if you're familiar with Southern California, but Camp Callan was about 4 miles from La Jolla, California, which was a beautiful area, right on the ocean, good weather. And it was a basic training camp operated by the Coast Artillery anti-aircraft. And my particular training was in searchlights, aircraft spotting searchlights. Although that was kind of secondary, primary was infantry training. And when we finished our basic training, which was about 17 weeks, which is about maybe 7 weeks or 6 weeks longer than most training, basic training, they called out about 50 names out of our battalion of 800 or so, and told us that we were going to go to ASTP. And most of us didn't know what ASTP was. You know, the Army does what it wants to do. And well, I don't know if you're familiar with ASTP, but it was a college training program. And I was sent to New Mexico School of Mines after some preliminary stops at some junior colleges for indoctrination and testing and things like that. And this was a terrific program because they not only kept the colleges in business, but they were training about 140,000 men that had higher IQs, because this was determined by your Army comprehensive test that they gave. In fact, somebody was saying at the breakfast today that he had a choice of going to OCS or to college, and he chose college because he wanted to get a degree, and you get a commission after you graduate. Unfortunately, the Army always changes their mind, and halfway through the first semester, they canceled the whole program and sent everybody to the ground forces. I was at New Mexico School of Mines, and the entire school came to the 12th Armored Division. And most of them to the infantry. I got into the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion.
So, how old were you when you finished high school?
I was 18. My birthday's in November, so I couldn't start first grade. They had no kindergarten those days. Mm-hmm. Couldn't start first grade until you were 6. Okay. So since I was 6, after school started, I couldn't start till the following year, so I graduated when I was 18 rather than 17 that some kids do.
How did Pearl Harbor affect you?
Well, I remember going with a friend of mine going to a movie on a Sunday, right after lunch, coming out of the movie and finding out that Pearl Harbor was bombed. And Pearl Harbor was like someplace on the moon or someplace. We were not as knowledgeable or sophisticated as people are nowadays with all the media that is available. I would say when I went to the Army at 18, I was probably as sophisticated as a 12 or 13-year-old boy is today. I was small. I weighed about 110 pounds. Not a poster child for Uncle Sam wants you. But there were a lot of them like that, and you went into an Army group with 18-year-olds and 20 years old and 24-year-old and 30-year-old, all the way to 38, I guess. So you had a cross section. But going back to Pearl Harbor, it was remote and obviously posed some concern, but at that time I was still 2 years away from graduating from high school, so you didn't know if the war was going to end in 6 months or 3 months, or. But then the school quickly mobilized. Instead of playing volleyball or basketball, all gym classes were calisthenics and close order drill, preparing the boys for the service. There was less free time. They even changed the curriculum some by requiring more math and science. Some of the teachers were in the reserves, so they quickly were either recalled or else were used to try to bring a little training into the high schools. And then as we got closer to graduation, then some of the boys even left school before graduation and joined the service. And others waited until they graduated and then went into service.
How did you feel about the war? Did you know that you wanted to join?
Well, I think everybody wanted to join. I think my greatest fear, was that I would not be accepted. As they say, I wasn't one of the big guys in the school, and I really feared that I would not be accepted, but no problem there at all. I don't remember that there was any concern about going into the service. At least I didn't have any. I kind of liked a lot of parts of the Army. I always liked the outdoors. I always liked fishing, hunting, shooting, camping, and the Army lets you do a lot of that stuff. So I kind of enjoyed it. I would say I lived in what is called the Calumet region of northern Indiana, which is just below Chicago. And up until I was in the service, I probably never went more than about 100 miles from home. I went up to Michigan and Chicago, Illinois, or some parts of Illinois, and then Indiana, but never, I don't think I was in 18 years more than 100 miles from home. And then I was inducted at Fort Benjamin Harrison, which is near Indianapolis, and a week later, all the way across the country to California, which was, to me was adventure at that time. I can't say I disliked the Army. There's a lot of things you don't like about somebody telling you to do this and do that, but generally I think I enjoyed the Army. And I think it's very fortunate. The camp was a very good camp. The food was good. Some of the people weren't all that great, but you get a cross section. We had people that could hardly read and write. We had people that didn't know their left foot from their right foot. But we had a lot of other very good people. It's such a cross section. I remember working later on, in Cajun country down at Weeks, Louisiana, and the people telling me there that some of the draftees during the war had never been off the island. They were born on the island and lived on the island, and when they're drafted, they're petrified to go to this foreign world. But that's the way. The world was our world was much closer and tighter. But I never anticipated that there would be problems, tomorrow or next week or next year. I just kind of take a day at a time. And then when I got selected for ASTP, I thought, well, it'd take me 3 years to get through college because they had an accelerated course. By that time, the war would probably be over, and I'd get a commission and spend a couple more years in the service and go home. But obviously, fate has other plans.
Who would be a friend that you remember? Who would be somebody you remember when you started your training in California that maybe even went with you to camp?
Well, nobody from my group went to ASTP, but I remember a number of a couple of people. You don't get to know a lot of people in the Army. You might be part of a 12th Armored Division, 10,000 people, but you hardly know more than 30 or 40. The people you can see. If they're out of sight, you probably won't know them. And so you know the people in your squad. You know the officers because they're there in front of you. You know this cadre or the non-coms. You know the people that get in trouble. You know the people who are, say, more boisterous because they stand out. The rest of the people are all wear the same clothes. They all look alike, and you just don't get to know many of them.
So tell me about your first day at Campbell. What do you remember?
First day at where?
When you come to Tennessee, up to Campbell.
Oh, I didn't go to Campbell. Camp Barkley.
You went to Camp Barkley.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about that.
Well, we were at New Mexico School of Mines, and the school had about 100 military students, and I don't know, 4 or 5 civilian students. That's all the students they had. When we left, I don't know what they did with the school. But anyway, we got to Camp Barkley. An officer met us as we got off the trucks. We came by train and then by truck to the camp. And before he went into his, he said welcome, but before he went into his talk, he told us to take our hats off and put them back on the left side. Most of the Army wears their hats on the right side, overseas caps. But he said, after he put them on the left side, he said, now you're in the armored force. So the armored force always wears on the left side. That stuck with me. I don't know how meaningful it is, but the first thing that happened at Camp Barclay. And then he talked about what they were going to do with us, that they were going to put us through a training program, like a basic training. We all had basic training, but to varying degrees, because people came from diverse spots. And some people might have had 17 weeks of basic, other people might have only had 10 weeks of basic. Some even came directly from ROTC in college. You know, they were in ROTC in college, and they got inducted into the Army, and they just left them at college in the ASTP program. Mm-hmm. At any rate, in about a week, they assigned us to various units, and some of the people in talking have mentioned that they were interviewed and asked if they want to be in tanks or in artillery. I don't remember that, and I don't. Something I probably just forgot. But all I remember is being assigned to the 17th Armored Infantry, Company A, anti-tank platoon, 1st Squad, and that's where I stayed until Hurlesheim.
What do you remember about the town Abilene when you first saw it? What do you remember thinking?
I didn't have much of an impression of Abilene. I didn't go there very often. For whatever reason, I don't know, I didn't spend much time outside of camp. If I had one day, like a day off on Sunday, with a couple other people, I'd stay in camp and do something. Occasionally, I went to Abilene. After California, Texas was not a real thrill. When I was in basic training, I could go to La Jolla, which is only 4 miles away. The camp bus would take to La Jolla. 12 miles away was San Diego. Further up the coast was Los Angeles. Now, when I went to ASTP originally, before they put you in a college training program, you went to what they call a STAR unit, specialized training and refresher or something like that. I don't know what STAR, I forget what the acronym is. But one was at Compton Junior College, which is in Compton, California, part of Los Angeles. And then I spent a couple of weeks there. Then I went to Chaffey Junior College in Ontario, California. Well, we could take the streetcar to Hollywood. Let's go to Hollywood Canteen, see everything that there is to see in Hollywood at the time. And Hollywood was, much better than it is now. It was at its peak with, the Brown Derby and fancy restaurants, and quite often, especially like in Ontario, the local population would just do anything they could for GIs. I know we'd go to church on Sunday, and families would be waiting outside the church to take you to dinner. And then when you go to Texas, especially Camp Barclay, all you see is sand and mesquite and dust. I don't know if you have seen any pictures of Camp Barclay, but we lived in plywood huts with a the dust would come in and go out, with holes in the holes in the floors and holes in the walls. So compared to California, it was a downer.
What else do you remember at the barracks, and how many people did you sleep in each little hut?
Just a squad, 10 people. And the 10 people that were in the squad, we went overseas together, and I know where I remember every one of them, and remember very much, what they were like, and
what were some fun events that took place in that, maybe in your little hut? Do you remember any practical jokes maybe that took place?
I don't remember anything specific. I'm sure there were, because this is almost necessary part of military life. And again, we had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we had 4 or 5 ASTP men in the squad, and the balance were older, more experienced, members of the 12th who had been at Camp Campbell and been in the Army 2 or 3 years.
How was it for you coming in as a new recruit for the 17th and trying to, how did you ease in pretty easily, or how did that?
I did not remember having any problems. There was some animosity. They used to refer to us as quiz kids, and there was some animosity, but most of it, I'd say, evaporated within a week or two. Because I don't remember any real problems we had. People that had problems, they have problems all the time anyways. I mean, it's, I had no real concern about. I fit right in, and I think I fit right in, and I got promoted to PFC, which I didn't expect, fairly quickly, and they came out with not a combat, but an expert infantry badge, which increased your salary by 10%, $5. And it was a fairly comprehensive test, both written and physical. I don't know what percentage of the people attained it, but again, I attained it on the first try, and but I never thought of it as anything great. But on the other hand, I just assumed it was part of the picture, part of what the Army was doing, and that, of course, became the combat infantry badge after you got into combat. The expert badge was the same thing without the wreath. It was just the blue bar.
What kind of, can you describe some of the training that they put you through?
Well, I was assigned to the anti-tank platoon, so we did a lot of training with our anti-tank gun, which was a 57 millimeter towed, more a rifle than a cannon, because it was a very large, high velocity shell. Although in combat we never used it. I think I was fortunate being in A Company of the 17th, because Captain Helton was, I don't know how to put this, he was a very gung-ho kind of guy. He was really stressed physical training and combat training, and we did a lot of rifle and all weapon firing, live firing. So much so that I heard, and I don't know how true this was. You hear these rumors that he got in trouble with his superiors because he was using up more ammunition than the other groups were using. But he would constantly take us out to shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. And I liked it. I enjoyed it. And, but I think that was a very positive. And then we had just about all kinds of training. They reviewed a lot of map reading and navigating with a compass at night. Texas is not very easy. Going across country middle of the night, and trying to find 2, 3, 4 points. And all the first aid and everything else that comes with Army training. I think the ASTP people made excellent soldiers, most of them. I think they probably was a waste, but as far as the military is concerned, you got a rifleman. I guess some people say, well, anybody could be a rifleman, but I think a rifleman that thinks is better than one that just does things by orders. And I think it proved itself out, throughout the rest of the history in World War II.
Did you go on any dates when you were in Abilene?
No.
No. Did you have a girlfriend back home? Or?
I used to write to half a dozen girls, and I think I had one that was more more closer to than the others. But I didn't.
Were your parents worried about you when you were down in Abilene? What did they think about you joining the war?
Well, my mother always felt that I was much too young to go to the Army, and my father didn't think so, because he was only 18 when he was with the Army. So I didn't date almost at all in the service.
What did can you describe one of your officers or your battalion commander maybe to me?
Well, my battalion commander, that post changed a couple times, and I didn't really know the battalion commander very well until Herlisheim. Maybe before Herlisheim, in combat. Then we had pretty much the same battalion commander. And then in Herlisheim, I was a runner for him. Mm-hmm. And I got a better feel for the man. And I think he was a very good man. I think he had the concern of his men. I think he tried to do a good job. I don't know about his superiors. I didn't know them. But I know in Herlisheim he tried to pull back a couple times, and they wouldn't let him. As a result, he eventually surrendered the town. And there were only about 120 of us left in town. The other officers, like say company officers, the two that I would know the best would be the company commander and my platoon leader.
What were their names?
Captain Helton was a company commander, and I mentioned that he was excellent. How can I put this? He was made for the part. He was gung ho. He was. I think he was very young. I think he was one of the youngest captains. He was only in his early 20s, I believe. But you never know that. He really had a presence about him that was, very good. Very knowledgeable. I never knew anybody that questioned his judgment or authority or. I don't want to say he was like Patton, but more towards an officer that is really in control and knows what he's doing. And my platoon leader was pretty much on the 180 degrees apart. He was a Bostonian who probably really hated the Army. Didn't like the Army, didn't like Army procedure, didn't like, although I was a runner for him also, I really didn't get to know him, closely. But he obviously didn't like the Army. He didn't like combat. He wasn't good at his job, I don't think. He was a good person, and as a platoon leader, I think we were fortunate because he was not demanding of us, less demanding than probably the company commander was, and I would guess he probably was in trouble with the company commander from time to time. I don't know that, but I'm just assuming that. In the States and overseas in several operations, I was somewhat, maybe a little disappointed. I expected an officer to be an officer. I expected a sergeant to be a sergeant. I was a private down at the bottom of the heap, and I assumed that if an officer was an officer or a non-com had a rank, it was for a reason. He was capable of it and he was qualified. And that wasn't always the case. Most of the time, but not always. The other officers, I didn't really know them that well because, again, they're somewhat remote. In a war, it's like if you read write-ups of various people, the write-up only covers what someone can see. From this spot, you can see 20 or 30 yards out, and that's your war. Everything else, maybe you might hear something, but the only thing you know is what is actually happening. And it might be a very minor skirmish to General Eisenhower, but to the GI, if he got shot and killed, it was a very big war. And that's the way it is with, trying to know people. Like somebody will say, well, you were in 12, do you know so-and-so? Well, no way. It'd be just a coincidence that you would know somebody in another unit. At least for me, I took basic training for, say, 17 weeks, and then it went to ASTP for several months, and then went to the 12th again for several months, you really don't have the time to develop long-term relationships.
How long did you get to be in Abilene before you guys were called overseas?
Well, the ASDP group got to Abilene in March, about mid-March.
Okay.
And we went overseas in late October. We got to France. Well, we went to England, and then we got to France about mid-November.
So what do you remember the day when they tell you guys to pack up your gear in Barclay and go? What are your feelings? What are you thinking at that time?
Go to where?
When you were going up to New York?
Oh, from Barclay. Well, it was. It's not a thing that happens. You know, somebody walks in and says, like they do in the movies. You know, everybody's laying around and playing cards or something, and somebody walks in and says, "Okay, we're leaving in 15 minutes." It doesn't happen like that. You know, over a period of several weeks, they began giving leaves to people who did not have leaves or furloughs for some time. And I got a furlough to go home. The first one, since I was in the service, it was over a year. It was over a year. And then the training starts changing a little bit. We went more into endurance training. We used to run. To run 5 miles before breakfast every morning. And if we didn't do it in less than 55 minutes, we'd do it again. And then the equipment, we began packing our equipment up and sending it away. And this takes weeks to do. And I don't know. I can't remember being concerned about it. It's just another adventure in the Army. And then we boarded trains and went to Camp Shanks in New York.
Did you get a pass to go to New York also?
No. Well, I don't know how come. I think so. I think I didn't want to go to New York, and I don't. Turned out I got guard duty, and it was a hurricane night. The tail end of a hurricane was coming up the East Coast and hit New York City. And the people that did go to New York City, a lot of them were flooded out or had problems getting into New York and getting around New York. But I remember walking guard, the lightning and the thunder and trees falling. But why somebody might ask me, well, I want to go to New York, and I probably said no, which probably was a mistake. And so I say, well, you're not going to go, you might as well have guard duty. I don't remember any other reason, and I don't know that I really had any desire to go to New York. I don't. I know reading some write-ups later on, like a good friend of mine, Marvin Tishkoff, was in my squad, and he came from South Bend, Indiana. And in his write-up, he talks about great desire to go to New York, and he did go to New York, and eventually went, after the war, went to work in New York. Still lives in New York City. For some reason, New York didn't impress me. London, now that was a different story. I really enjoyed that 3-day pass in London while we were in England, and I really enjoyed, so much so that I think I've gone to London maybe 100 times since then.
How about the boat ride over? What boat did you go over?
Well, we went on our entire unit went on the Empress of Australia. The British liner that was originally German and was taken from Germany as reparations during World War I. It was a terrible ordeal. It was one of the worst ordeals in my Army history. We were on E deck, which was five decks down, and it was just about the waterline. Being a British ship, we slept in hammocks that we strung up every night in this low ceiling room, stateroom. Ventilation was poor. The food was atrocious. People complain about Army food, but British food on a troop ship was atrocious. It was rotten. Anything that was like meat or was actually rotten. It was, and I probably ate mostly the bread, which was good, freshly baked bread, and one orange a day that we got, or an apple or something like that, and chocolate bars we could buy at the PX. I think it took us 11 days to. There was some rough seas, so a couple days people were getting seasick. As long as I stayed prone, it didn't bother me. But it was a. I remember an incident. For some reason, I was walking on one of the upper decks, because we were allowed to go on the decks for exercise, or we were required to go out for exercise. But there was so many people on board that there was not very much space, even for walking around, and there was certainly not enough space for everybody to sit down on the floor. But I went up on a higher deck and was passing the officers' mess, and I was flabbergasted because the officers' mess had linen tablecloths, linen napkins. They had the crystal chandeliers, wine glasses, and I bumped into a steward or somebody working in the kitchen, a British soldier, and there was another GI with me, and we asked him, what are the officers having? And he said, well, they're going to have chicken today. So we said, well, how'd you like to sell us some chickens, or some chicken? We had no idea what the dish was going to be. We just knew the chicken. So he said, well, I can sneak you out a couple of chickens. And I forget what he charged, a couple of pounds. A pound was $4.40 at that time, which was a lot of money, especially when you're only making $50 a month. But we bought, I think we bought 5 chickens, and we took them down to our stateroom, and they were just cooked chickens. And I would guess that the officers probably had cream chicken on toast or something like that. So these were just boiled chicken, and they were not edible. We paid all that money for them. It ended up throwing them over the side because they were just not edible, because they were probably in storage. They probably brought them over from England, came to the States, picked us up, and they weren't frozen. I don't think they had frozen facilities in those days. So that was my trip on the Empress. And I think just about everybody that was on will give you about the same story.
How about England? Where do you guys land?
Well, we landed, I believe, in Liverpool. I always get Liverpool and Southampton mixed up. but I think it was Liverpool where we landed at that time. And then we went to a camp they called Tidworth Barracks. And if you talk to some of the other artillery or the tanks, they'll talk about these nice brick barracks, 3-story or whatever they were. But that's not where we stayed. We stayed on the outskirts of this Tidworth Barracks, and I think they called it Petting Field or Petting Barracks or something like that. But it was just a big field, and we lived in squad tents. Again, about 10 people per tent. And it was October, which is not really cold, but it's very miserable. Temperatures, in the high 30s maybe, but the humidity is very high. The British, I know they issued us, the Army issues you 2 Army blankets, which you carry with you, personal issue. But I think I had 5 more English blankets, which are real heavy, white or gray blankets, and I was still cold sleeping on a cot. I mentioned I got to London, and but I didn't get to many other places other than we had to outfit our half-tracks. When we got them overseas, they allowed us to put extra racks on the whole our baggage, so to speak, our sleeping bags. And so we had to go from Tidworth to another town to get them welded on. And on the way, we'd always look for the bakeries and buy all the bread and pastry we could and bring it back to the tents. And we really enjoyed that. And then they had the like a canteen where they always served tea and cookies, donuts, and in general, I always enjoyed my stay there in England. I enjoyed thoroughly, other than the cool climate and wet. It was wet almost all the time.
How about encounters with the British people? Did you have any?
I would say I only have the best remembrance of the British people.
Do you have any significant, just story to tell, a time that stands out in your memory?
Well, I'd say there's nothing really unusual other than they were always very friendly. I know we went to London, they put us up in sleeping places, and they had a number of these USO clubs that all kind of entertainment and refreshments, and then seeing London, all the sights, the Westminster Abbey and House of Parliament and Hyde Park and Green Park and everything else.
So you're finished with your training, and do you at this time, how are you feeling? Because now you're in Europe, actually, not in America anymore. What are your feelings about the war?
I don't remember having any greater concern. It was always, mañana or tomorrow, or it's still a long distance away, time-wise and distance-wise. And again, I don't remember having any particular concern. Things were new, new places to see, new things to do. even up to the first day of combat, I don't think we were really, I don't know, I don't want to say we weren't prepared. I think we were prepared as soldiers, but at least the way I felt and the way I thought most of my close friends felt, it was not, I don't think they had a concern. I think it's similar to today. Young people, drive at high speeds. They just had the incident with the college student drinking. The thought is it'll never happen to me. Whatever happens, it'll happen to somebody else, not to me. And I think the same attitude that most GIs took.
So tell me about the day when you crossed the channel.
Well, again, I think I was fortunate in crossing the channel. I was assigned to our half track. The driver and myself and I think 2 other people went with the half track in a LST. So we boarded after dark, and the LST was a luxury liner compared to the Empress of Australia. We got a terrific meal, evening meal. I remember it was something like steak and all the trimmings and ice cream and pie and then while it was still dark in the morning, I think we had a breakfast. And then when we got into our vehicles to prepare to disembark, one of the sailors asked us if we wanted some canned food, because he said that they get a ration for our trip. And he said, we don't use it up, we just throw it away. So he gave us several cases of these large gallon cans of peaches and fruit cocktail, and we just put it in our half track and took it with us and shared it with the rest of our people. The other people, which was the bulk of the GIs, went on a different ship, and they didn't speak very highly of that trip either. I guess they got seasick, and they got moved around by truck and then to the ship and then off the truck, where we drove our vehicle on and drove our vehicle off, and then we landed at Le Havre and went inland for a couple days before we met up with them. And again, I think it was an adventure at that time, and nobody was shooting at us at the time. I don't remember anything very unusual. The 4 of us kind of enjoyed being on our own. I don't know how many vehicles were in our group. There were some tanks, but then after we landed, they went their way. We I don't know, maybe we had a dozen or so half tracks that we went from Le Havre to Offay, and we met up with the rest of our people.
The French people, how are they greeting you? How are they, receiving you compared to that? Was there a different reception towards how the British had accepted you? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I really didn't. I didn't have much to do with civilians in France. I see some of them. I didn't get the warmth that you got out of, the British. whatever they did, they gave you the impression we're glad you're here. I didn't always get that from the French, but then, maybe I just didn't understand them. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't have much contact with them. The few places we had contact with them, in some towns we were billeted with some French, families. I know in one town my squad was billeted with 2 older women that were school teachers, and they were very nice. We would supply them with flour and sugar and everything we could pilfer from the kitchen, and they would bake cookies and cakes. But we were only there for maybe a week or so, and they were very nice. But I couldn't speak French. This friend, Marvin Tishkoff, he had high school French. And he could get some, communication, but other than that, like I say, I didn't have a whole lot of contact with the French.
So when was the first shot fired? What do you remember the first day you actually were in battle?
Well, we went to a town of Binning, Bining, and it was late at middle of the night. I don't know. We were to relieve the 26th Infantry, or I forget which infantry. We were relieving an infantry unit, and we came by half-track to within several miles of the place, and then we got out and walked. And as we got to the first house in town, which happened to be Captain Helton's CP, he set up his CP in his first house, and we were lying along the road in the ditches waiting, like the Army, you're always waiting for something. And shells were going off in the distance. You could see shells exploding. But again, they were in a distance. There was, no real concern. And we were to my squad. We were to go to an outpost that somebody was setting up to the left of us. As I say, it was dark, and it's really dark because there's no lights at all in an area like that. And somebody came, one of our people came up Private Shortridge, and he was supposed to direct us to this outpost. And with us was our platoon sergeant, Sergeant Bixby, a very good man, very much older. I think he was gray-haired at that time, although it probably was premature gray because he couldn't have been, he had to be maybe 40 years old, 38, something like that, maybe even younger. But to me, he was an old man. At any rate, we started moving down this street, a small country town, and we got to a certain point, and our guide was confused, and so Bixby said, "Well, guys, stay here. I'm going to go and check out which way we're supposed to go." So they went in, off into the dark, and then we heard somebody yell, "Halt!" but in a German dialect, and then there was a burst of a submachine gun. We had our weapons in our sleeping bags because we were planning to go to this outpost and put our sleeping bag to go to sleep. And most of us didn't even have our weapons loaded or in firing position. So we quickly dropped to the ground and prepared for the worst. And then first Shortridge comes running as fast as he could right past us and kept running. And then Sergeant Bixby came out. And apparently it was a German patrol that probably was as frightened as we were. And they went their way, and we backed up and went back to where the CP was. Mm-hmm. And then we realized that, well, now we're really in a war. This is a real thing. Mm-hmm. So when we got to instead of going to CP, we went to the house across the street from the CP where my platoon leader had his CP. And we came in there, and he said, well, this house is full of people. He said, well, go upstairs to the attic, and by this time it was maybe 2 in the morning or something like that. He said, go up in the attic, just try to find a place to lay down, and because in the morning we're going to attack Binning. Well, we felt our way up these stairs and into this attic area, and unrolled our sleeping bags and went and tried to get some sleep. And there's one of our people in our platoon, Paul Clutho. He was the last one up the stairs, so he was sleeping right at the stairway. And I don't know whether we slept for half an hour or an hour, and all of a sudden the Germans start shelling the house, and the tiles off the roof were flying every which way, and everybody ran down the stairs except Paul. The sleeping bag had a big zipper, which if you zipped it all the way up, it would open up, like an emergency. But he couldn't open it up, and everybody just walked over him and went down the stairs. He was the last one to come down, and for weeks he groused about how we mistreated him, stepping all over him. It was more humorous than dangerous, I think. And that was our, so to speak, baptism under fire. And next day and that was the first time we saw dead Americans. The unit that pulled out, they left quite a few dead GIs. And that's, kind of a startling sight, And then the next several days we attacked Binning and then Rohrbach, and mostly with very little resistance. In fact, most of us didn't even see any Germans. Mm-hmm. They'd fire, and there'd be some artillery or mortar shells, but they would move out as fast as we'd move in. Occasionally you see a dead German, but not very often. So that's pretty much how and after a few days, it's, I don't really want to say it's commonplace, but at least you're somewhat aware of what's going to happen. And then, for the infantryman, the worst thing is cold, hunger, being tired, and lack of sleep, and being dirty. You're always dirty. So you don't wash or shave for days on end, and that's, it's the thing about the Army is when you're in combat, you're dirty, and the minute they take you out of combat, they start yelling at you to spruce up,
What are some other battles that you remember? Some other, just that stand side?
Well, we went into the Maginot Line, which again wasn't, our part wasn't all that severe. The Germans moved out. We had some incidents. I don't know if I can remember, but there's some. I remember going one time, and I don't know what. I don't even remember what time place this was, but I know it must have been in December. Later, just maybe before Christmas. It was snowing. It was at night. It was snowing, and we were moving forward. And then I have to think that somebody, maybe Captain Hilton or somebody else, saw a chance to give us a break, and we went down into a chalk mine, down a very steep stairway, suspended stairway, I remember, and it was damaged. It was very difficult to get down there with all your equipment. But once down there, it was wonderful. It was warm, and you could take your shoes off and change your socks and eat. They had a lot of rations there, and they had I believe they had a couple of wounded people there. I know they had one GI, and he was not from our, from the anti-tank area. He might have been from artillery. But he apparently was, I don't want to use the word shell shock, but he was ranting and raving on the radio, like if he was on the radio. And he apparently was, at least what I remember, and I don't know how accurate this was, but he apparently was calling artillery. A forward observer calls it artillery to support the troops. And the artillery fell short, was falling on his troops, and he was screaming for them to lift the artillery, and he lost it, and I remember walking by him, and they were holding him down, and he was screaming this call sign and trying to lift the artillery. And then they took him up, and I guess took him to aid station. But that was a very good break for, the warmth and getting warm for 3 or 4 hours. Let your feet thaw out. And let's see.
How about you for first Christmas? What do you remember at Christmas Day?
Well, Christmas Day, I don't know what town we were in. I might have it someplace in my record, but we were camped out someplace in a town, but I don't know whether I can't remember whether we were built in houses or whether we were out in the field someplace. But I remember going to Christmas Mass later Christmas Eve. And also, I remember we had a very good Christmas dinner, hot Christmas dinner, turkey, and just like with all the trimmings. It was brought up, by our kitchen crew. But it was if not a combat situation, a semi-combat. Because I remember going on patrol after going to Mass. I think Mass was like 7 o'clock in the evening. It was after dark. And I remember going on patrol with a couple of guys after that. Kind of give you something to think about. And that's about all I to say about Christmas other than we got some, we got some parcels that from home, and I used to get a lot of mail from a lot of people and a lot of parcels, so I think I'm pretty fortunate that way. And then after Christmas, it got cold. I mean, if it was cold at Christmas, then it really got cold. And continue to freeze your feet. And again, living like an animal in the hole, in the cold all the time. If you got 4 hours sleep a day, you're lucky, and you're always exercising, you're always running. I remember running on frozen feet where you couldn't feel your feet at all. It's like running on stumps. But it's the way of the world, I guess.
How about Herleshheim? What do you remember about just getting there?
Well, we were in a reserve in a small town. We were built in a reserve, and then we were told we're going on the line again. And that I'd say if there's probably the worst concern you have after you get into combat, or not concern, I don't know how to phrase this, but it's the you're glad to get off the line, and then when you have to go back on the line, that first while you're getting there, or when you're first told about it, that's probably the worst time. Once you get out back on the line, it's more the same. So, but that change from being back, being someplace warm and then going back is I think more destructive than a lot of combat is. And I think that's why the Air Force had more combat fatigue, because they did that every day. And they live in England in luxury, and then they go out and get shot at as they bombed. And the next day they're back home, and then it's like bending a piece of metal, and after a while it breaks. And I think this is about the same thing. And then going into Herleshheim, we knew we were going in, and again, it was like many of our other, operations where we'd take the half track so far, and then we'd get out and we'd walk. And I don't know how it happened or why it happened, but somebody told me that I was going to be a runner for Major Logan, the battalion commander. Again, I never questioned the Army. They told me to do something, I did it. The other one was Bill Funky. I don't know if you know Bill Funky. And he and I were runners. And we went, as we got to this starting off point, some officer, I don't know who, probably a battalion officer or some aide, told us, well, stay here and somebody will come and get you. Meanwhile, the battalion started moving out. One man on each side of the road, every 10 or 15 yards, spacing between men. And they just kept moving out, and we sat there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, maybe even more than that. And nobody came. Meanwhile, all these columns are going further and further. And then a Jeep comes riding, screaming down the road from the front. And there's another officer, again, I didn't know who he was, again, from battalion, I assume. And he's, livid. Where are you guys? So we were sitting here because so-and-so told us to stay here. And he said, well, that's wrong. He says, get up to the front. Well, he didn't offer to put us in a Jeep and take us there, but so we ran, and I'd say we ran for an hour to get to the front of the column. And as soon as we got there, Major Logan looked at his watch and says, okay, we're going. So we started going into Herlisheim. Well, not the Herlisheim, because it was not our objective. I think our objective was Offendorf. I think that was it. But it was, and we started out across these fields. And at first there was, no resistance, or there was some mortar fire. And then later in the morning, we got held up by a machine gun, a German machine gun, and we got pinned down, and they called for, the battalion had all the resources, so they called for some support fire. I don't remember whether it was a tank or mortars or artillery, but anyway, they knocked out the machine gun. And then somebody, I don't know whether Major Logan or one of his aides, told us to go over there and check them out. So we went up there, and there was, I believe, 3 German soldiers who were dead. And just kind of looking around, at them. One thing I noticed is that it was difficult to recognize their body shape. It was just like all their bones were broken, and it's like their clothes were stuffed with rags as opposed to limbs. But anyway, as I was looking at them, I happened to notice they have a metal canister that they wear on their belt for the gas mask. And it's, I think it's aluminum or metal with the olive drab paint on it. And this soldier had scratched his name in there. His last name was Funky. And Bill was with me, and I said, Bill, look at this. And he looked at it, he says, and I think he was, shocked, surprised. He says, well, it might be one of my cousins. Or relatives, he said, not cousin. He said, one of my relatives. Whether he had any relatives in Germany at that time, I don't know, but I thought he was just making a comment, but... And then we, of course, continued on, and we got to, I wouldn't call it a hill, but just a sloping grain field. And up front on one side was a heavy wooded area. And I guess it was late afternoon, and they decided that we're going to stay there for the night and then proceed next morning. And the infantry was kind of scattered across this field, and then there were maybe 6 or 8 tanks that were maneuvering behind us to find positions for the night. And all of a sudden, out of the woods, the Germans start shooting anti-tank 88s, and they start knocking the tanks out just one after another. And the tanks were backing up to try to get away, get over the slight rise. And there was an officer, and again, I I don't remember who he was, but again, I assume he was from battalion. And he was starting to give us instructions for our units, and there were maybe 4 or 5 of us standing, and meanwhile this gun battle was going on between the tanks and the guns in the woods, and all of a sudden our group just like exploded. There was not an explosion, but what I think happened is one of these 88s came right between us, you know, 'cause they shoot them about that high off the ground, and they're a solid piece of steel. They're not explosive. They're going at such high velocity that they punch a hole in the tank, but they have such a shock wave because they're traveling so fast that the shock wave just knocked everybody down. And one GI passed out or was knocked out. The rest of us just shook up a little bit. So we quickly scattered and started digging in. And we stayed there the night, and I don't remember anything much after that, and I don't know why. There's nothing that sticks in my mind throughout the night. And then next morning, Bill tells me that I was with him as a runner for Logan, but then later in the morning, I was back with my platoon. And I don't remember the change. I don't remember, why but I do remember being back with my platoon, and the battle plan was changed to attack Herlisheim from the south. And unknown to us at the time, the 56th had tried the previous week to attack Herlisheim from the north and failed with a lot of casualties. And we were going in from the south, and at first I was with my squad, and I remember we ran into, we had some opposition from some Germans all over on our right. And they fired us, we fired them, and I don't know, it was some distance, and then they moved off, so I don't even know whether we hit any of them. They didn't hit any of us. And then as we moved across the field, the mortars were raining down pretty heavily, and I was running across the field with my squad. Joe Newby was right near me, and Jack Tubin was right behind me, and a shell went off to my right, and Newby got hit in the back, and Tubin got hit in the face and neck. Neither one of them really serious, but they were bleeding, and so we yelled for the medics. They both went down, and we yelled for the medics, and then we went on. And Joe Newby and I were very close friends all through. He was at ASTP at a different school than I was, but from the time we got to 12th, we were very close. We were in the same squad and had the same kind of interests. He came from Chicago originally, and so I was concerned about him, but it turned out he was not really seriously hurt. But then I never saw him again, because I went into Herlisheim, and he didn't. I got captured, and he didn't. And then, as we went further into Herlisheim, or we weren't in Herlisheim yet, but we were coming into the outskirts. Lieutenant Ogletree, who was my platoon leader, tells me that I'm his runner now. So I start moving around with him, and as we got into the first house in town, he had put 3 or 4 people in the first house to protect our right flank. That's where the Germans were coming from. We were on the right side of Herlisheim. Herlisheim was a small country town. The other platoons were going through the center and on the left, I guess. And we left the 4 people there, and then we went further into town, and then we set up I guess it was his CP, and we had a couple squads there. And I really can't tell you how far in town it was. It seemed to me like 4 or 5 blocks into the town of maybe 10 block city. And then for some reason he wanted to go back and take a look at the people at the house, at the first house that we left the group. And as we were going there, there were more Germans around there coming into town, and they're shooting at us from various directions. And we had trouble getting near the house. We finally, going around the back, we went over a wall and got into the house. As we came in the back door, one of our guys, Brandvold, got killed. He got hit right at the time, because as we walked in, they just said, well, he just got hit. And he died right away. And then, I don't know, I guess he told the rest of the guys, well, you just, keep the Germans away, because we're further up here in town. So then we went further up in the town, and I remember going along the way, I spotted a German equipment belt laying full of equipment on it. I noticed it had a pistol on it, so it must have been an officer that was captured. And pistols were very highly prized trophies. So I cut the belt in 2 and just took the pistol because I didn't want to be burdened with all the other equipment that's on the belt. And then I figured that Lieutenant Ogletree probably wouldn't have approved of me stopping to get a trophy. But anyway, we went on and went back to the house, and again, there's some time spans there where I can't remember what was happening, but we stayed pretty much in the house, fighting off the Germans in various positions. Ogletree was downstairs in the basement. This was I think a 2-story house. We were on the main floor up front. And then after early afternoon, I'd say, every noon you get a new password and a password and countersign. And you have to take it out to all the people so they all have the same password. Well, somebody's got to do that. And so I was going to take it out to groups, and by the name of George Harm came along with me. Now, I don't know whether he wanted to come with me or whether somebody told him to come with me. But he came along with me, and every place we went, somebody was shooting at us. And I don't know whether they're Germans or Americans, but it was just starting to get dark. We got to two or three, two I think, groups that we gave them the loot password. And we tried to get back to that original house where Bramwell was killed, and we could not penetrate. The Germans were all over the place. And then we were running back, trying to get back to the house, and we were running down the street, and came to a corner house where the house was right up to the corner. There was no sidewalk or anything. It's country town. The street came right up to the house. And we ran around the corner of his house, and coming up the street was a German tank. And we ran in, just by ran into it. And they probably were as startled as we were. Harmon opted to run behind the house, but there was a fence and a gate, and the gate opened inward, so it made everything more difficult. But as he swung the gate open and ran through, they shot at him, and they shot the gate off, but didn't touch him. And then I turned around and ran back to the corner, and they shot at me and obviously didn't hit me. And then I went around the house and then looking for Harmon because I thought he got hit, and found him, and then we went eventually go back to our house. And that might have been 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. And then all that evening and into the early morning, we were being attacked from every direction with tanks and artillery and grenades and rifle machine gun fire. And I don't know how many people we had in the house originally, maybe a dozen. But then people kept drifting in as they were trying to escape the Germans, and a lot of them were wounded. And then, I don't know, sometimes early morning, somebody said that Major Logan is out there with the Germans on a white flag, and he wanted us to surrender. I can't remember whether I saw Major Logan or not. It's a memory I have. Somebody telling me that, but I don't know whether I really saw him or not. But I know he surrendered because he was at another CP, and I know, in fact, he and Captain Helton were in the same CP when the Germans threw in some grenades in their house, and they eventually surrendered. In any event, we came out of the house, and as I was coming out of the house, I remembered I had this German pistol in my pocket. I quickly threw that away under some furniture, and I didn't want to get captured with a German pistol. And we came out and surrendered.
Where did they take you?
Well, first obviously like we did when we captured, we relieved them of all their weapons, grenades and knives and ammunition. And probably the guy that had the biggest rank, a sergeant or so, he took everybody's watch. They're always looking for things like that. Some young soldier told me he wanted my gloves, and one of the few good things the Army had for winter was gloves. It was a wool knit glove with a complete leather, two-piece wool inside of leather. And he liked them, so he wanted them. So I gave it to him, and he gave me his gloves, which happened to be kind of blue-gray wool knit gloves, but they had white phosphorus still glowing he apparently got close to one of our white phosphorus grenades or artillery shells. And then, and I don't know, this group was maybe about the ones that could walk, because the ones who were wounded, they called out. They called all the officers out right away. There was no officers with us, just non-coms and enlisted men. And there might have been 20 of us. And the combat troops that captured us, they started moving us towards the Rhine. Hildesheim is very close to the Rhine River. And as they moved through there, through what would be their behind the lines operation, they apparently were feeding their troops. And somebody says, if you want some of the food, we'll give it to you if you got a container. Well, we didn't have our mess kits or anything like that, but I took my helmet off and took the liner out and washed it out with the steel helmet with some snow, and I think it was George Harmon and I split a helmet full of barley soup, very, very thick barley and some kind of meat. It could be horse meat or a lot of dead cows that died from artillery fire were butchered as soon as they had the opportunity. So we hadn't eaten anything hot for 2 or 3 days. And then they marched, it was still dark, and they marched us close to the Rhine. And then we got to a point, and there was, some confusion. By now, we were guarded not by the combat troops, but by, what would be rear echelon, older guys. And we got to a point, and they told us to stand here. And there's 2 tanks sitting there facing us. And of course, weeks before that, we heard about Malmedy and the killing of American troops. So that thought kind of raced through our minds, but as it turned out, there was some confusion about where we were going to go, and in a little while we moved off. And we got onto a barge. The Germans had a cable strung across a large cable strung across the Rhine River, which was maybe a half mile wide or maybe wider at that point. And they had this barge attached to it, and with a pulley, and by putting out the rudders, this barge would shuttle back and forth across the river. And that's the way they took us across the Rhine and started marching us. And we marched until into daylight. I don't know what time, but maybe mid-morning, when we saw another group of GIs being marched, and eventually they put us together. It turned out that they were our people that got captured by another group. And of all the the concern about getting wounded or getting killed, or that never was a big concern. But being captured, it was very difficult to accept. In fact, maybe I saw too many movies as a young kid, but I couldn't believe that the Army was going to let us get captured. I fully expected that maybe for a week or maybe even longer than a week, I fully expected that, around the next turn or soon the Army's going to come running up and they're going to recover us. But that never happened.
How long were you kept in prison camp?
About 3 months.
How how's the morale in the camp? And what are some activities that you did?
Well, we went, well, we marched into the Black Forest, and we went to like a processing camp. We only stayed there a couple of days, and they searched us several times, and they interrogated us there, and they tried some. I don't think they harmed anybody, but they threatened to. They would come in the middle of the night and call you out of wherever you were bedded down and take you to a room and ask you questions, and you just give them name, rank, and serial number, and after a while they maybe yell at you or they threaten you, but in the end they never did anything. They take you back to your place. They probably knew more than we did about our unit and where we were, where we were going. And then from there we walked again through the Black Forest, which was very nice. It was a beautiful area, snow on the ground. And I got our first encounter with German civilians. Some places I went through town, the kids would throw stones at us or yell something in German which we didn't understand. But I remember one time we were walking, and we would walk maybe 25 miles a day, and every once in a while I would stop to rest. But this time it was, again, by mid-morning or before noon, and we stopped at a couple of farmhouses, and there was I don't know, they call it a creek or a drainage ditch or something like that, but the water was rushing fairly strongly, and I was very thirsty, because when you're walking they don't allow you to step out of line to grab some snow or something like that. So they told us, that we could have a break. I took my helmet off, and I scooped up some water, and I started drinking it. And the German housewives were standing there watching, and they started screaming and yelling. And, I didn't know why, but they weren't yelling. They were yelling at the guards, and apparently this was not potable water. This was drainage from the fields or whatever. And they told the guard to tell me to quit drinking the water, which he did. And then they brought water from the house for us to drink in buckets. I didn't get sick from it, so maybe it was fortunate there was a lot of snow runoff. And then we went to another camp in Ludwigsburg, which is just outside of Stuttgart. We were there for a few days, and then they put us in. We only marched to a rail yard, and we got on in boxcars, and they took us all the way up to Bremen in northern Germany, to a little town of Fallingbostel, which was Stalag 11B, a large camp with, 5,000-6,000, all nations, Russians, Poles, French, English, Americans, and even Italians, because Italy was out of the war by then, and so the Germans put some of their friends in the prison camp also. And we were there probably the longest, because we were there from, I would say, sometime last week in January until April 16th.
So tell me about the war's end.
Well, the war's end was really a bummer because on April 16th, the British armor unit come charged in, knocked the fence down, and I'm told that Montgomery was with them. Mm-hmm. It was one of his units. Now, I didn't see him, but Bill Funky tells me that it was Montgomery. Then they dumped off some food that they had, and we also were able to go to the camp. Next to our prison camp was an SS military installations, and they had a warehouse of some kind, and we went there and we took everything we could, and there was all kinds of stuff. There was sacks of oatmeal and cans of syrup and gold colored flatware, just like a warehouse. Crystal wine glasses, what would amount to PX supplies, I would say perfumes. Mm-hmm. What's the German brand of perfume? The old standby, something 423. I can't think of it, but it's a well-known old-time perfume. And wallets and insignias and all kinds of things like that, which we just helped ourselves to. But then we took all this food and had our first decent meal, and all got sick from eating food that was too rich. Because in a prison camp, almost every day we got rutabaga soup, which is mostly boiled rutabagas with almost no meat. Occasionally there'd be some strings of meat, again, if they were able to get some cows or horses that were killed, and they would cook them up in the soup. We get usually 1/8 of a loaf of bread apiece. Each loaf weighed 2.2 pounds. No, 4.4 pounds, 2 kilo rolls, very heavy bread, like pumpernickel, very much like pumpernickel, although everybody said that it had sawdust in it, and I don't know right or wrong. And then we used to get, in the morning and in the evening, we'd get a hot drink, which was barley water, where they roast the barley and then try to use it for coffee, to make coffee, but it makes something more like tea than coffee. It doesn't have much body to it. And in the morning, some GIs would use it to shave with because it was hot and wet, and some would drink it, and some would not bother and throw it away. And then the only other thing that would keep you alive was the Red Cross parcels, which the governments would give to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross, International Red Cross, would try to convince the Germans to give them to the prisoners. And from what I understand, a lot of them were, if they gave 10,000 to the prisoners, they maybe took 2,000 or 3,000 for themselves because they were pretty destitute at that time. And the Red Cross parcels had like 4 packs of cigarettes and a tin of powdered milk and a chocolate bar and some cocoa and some Spam and some cookies and some gum, and it was a box about this size. And sometimes we'd get 4 to a box, sometimes 6 to a box, sometimes 10 to a box. When you get a can of Spam, you got to cut it 10 pieces. You don't get much, but it's better than nothing. So, and then sometimes you got. The only time I got a box all of myself